Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the last lecture we covered how to remove the repeating groups to bring our relation in first normal form, and this is what we did last time. This was the shape of the table when we put in the data from the when we put in the invoice data of the Pine Valley Furniture Company, and it had these repeating groups because this is one. It has two rows, one for each order. This is a row for order ID 1006, and these are the repeating values or repeating groups inside this row. Similarly, for order 107, these are the repeating rows. So in the first step, we remove these repeating rows by creating different rows for each product ID, and this was the shape of our relation after removing the repeating groups. Today we will see how to convert this relation into second normal form, and then how to convert our relation into third normal form. So for converting relation into second normal form, first of all, the relation should be in first normal form, which means it should not have any repeating groups inside the relation. So now we will convert this relation which doesn't have any repeating groups into second normal form. And in all the following steps, second normal form, third normal form, boy scout, and fourth and fifth, we actually separate the relation and create smaller, well-structured relations. And whenever we separate a relation, we also remove the insertion, updation, and deletion anomalies from the relations. So let's see. So I will only take this part which shows the attributes or fields inside the relation. So in second normal form, we have to remove the partial dependencies. I have shown the partial dependencies with different colors. So we have this partial dependency in which customer address, customer name, customer ID, and order date are dependent on order ID, which is part of the primary key. Second partial dependency is between these fields: product description, finish, and send price. These non-key attributes are dependent on product ID. Product ID is also part of the primary key. So as I told you in the last lecture, a partial dependency is when one or more than one non-key attributes depend on part of a primary key. Now here the primary key is actually order ID and product ID. It is made up of two attributes. So these four attributes depend on one part of the primary key, and these three attributes depend on another part of the primary key. So there are two partial dependencies. The rule for removing the partial dependency is that we for each attribute of the primary key, we create a new relation. So we have two parts in our primary keys. One is order ID and one is product ID. So it means we will create two relations. In one relation we will make order ID the primary key, which is this one, and in the other relation we will make product ID the primary key, which is this relation. In the second step, all the attributes which are partially dependent on this order ID are removed from this relation, and we move them to the new relation in which order ID is the primary key. So we will remove order date, customer ID, customer name, and customer address from this relation, and we will take them to the relation in which order ID is the primary key. So as you see here, order date, customer ID, customer name, customer address have been moved from this relation to this relation. Similarly, these three attributes will be moved to this relation in which product ID is the primary key. So ultimately we are left in this relation we are left with order ID, product ID, and order quantity. These three attributes which depend on product ID will be removed, and these four attributes which depend on order ID will also be removed. So this relation, this one, will be reduced to this relation in which we only have order ID, product ID, which is actually the primary key of this relation, and there is only one non-key attribute which is fully dependent on these two attributes. In short, all the attributes which are fully functionally dependent will remain in this relation. All non-key attributes that are partially dependent on a part of the primary key will be removed. So this is the second normal form, this part. Now our relation is split into three relations. One of I have named them customer order, product, and order line. Once our relation are in second normal form, we have to check for any transitive dependencies inside our relations one by one. If there is no transitive dependency, it means the relation is already in third normal form. So let's see. A transitive dependency is when some of the non-key attributes depend on another non-key attribute, and that non-key attribute depends on our primary key. So in this first relation, which is customer order, customer name and customer address are dependent on customer ID. Their determinant is customer ID, and customer ID is dependent on order ID. So here we have a transitive dependency. I have shown this in blue color. It means this relation has a transitive dependency in it. So the rule for third normal form is that we have to remove any transitive dependencies. If there is a transitive dependency in the relation, that relation is not in third normal form. So this relation is not in third normal form. Now let's check out this relation. In the product relation, all these non-key attributes, which are product description, product relation, and product selling price, are fully dependent on product ID. So there is a full functional dependency. This relation is already in third normal form. Similarly, order quantity is fully dependent on product ID and order ID, so this relation is also in third normal form. It means after applying the rules for second normal form, these two relations have come into third normal form, while this relation has a transitive dependency, so it is not in third normal form, and we will have to treat it to bring it into third normal form. So the rule for removing a transitive dependency is that a non-key attribute which is determinant. In this relation, customer ID is a non-key attribute, but it is also a determinant. Determinant means that some other non-key attributes depend on this relation, this attribute. So customer ID is a non-key attribute, but also a determinant. So we will create a new relation for this attribute, and we will make it a primary key in the new relation. So here is the new relation by the name customer, having customer ID as the primary key, and then we will move these two non-key attributes which are dependent on this non-key attribute, and we will move them to the new relation. So we will remove customer name and customer address from this relation, and we will move them to the new relation in which customer ID is the primary key. And this customer ID will remain in this relation, but it will become a foreign key. So now customer ID, customer order, the relation has been reduced to order ID, order date, and customer ID. Here customer ID is a foreign key, and this part we have a new relation with customer ID as a primary key, and customer name and customer address have been moved from this relation to this relation, and now they are fully dependent on customer ID. Now the transitive dependency has been removed from this table. Now if we see them again, in this table these two attributes are fully dependent on order ID. In the product table or product relation, these three attributes are fully dependent on product ID. In order line relation, order quantity is fully dependent on these two attributes, and in the customer relation, customer name and address are fully dependent on customer ID. So now we have after removing the transitive dependencies, we have four relations, and all of these relations are in third normal form. So after applying this steps 1, 2 and 3, which means after bringing this relation to third normal form, this single relation has been split into four relations: customer order, product, order line, and customer order. Now all these four relations are well structured relations because in each of these relations all the attributes all the non-key attributes are fully functionally dependent on their primary keys. uh, this was the last topic, and in the next lecture, not in the next lecture, I will just send you a video in which I will solve a few questions from exercise of chapter 4, so that you can have an idea that how we can crack a question. Okay ji, Allah Hafiz.